This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Baruch Haba. We're continuing Mishna Berura Daf Hashavua. We're learning Siman Mem Beis, the end of Sif Gimel. The end of Sif Gimel, the Ramah says that a klaf that was canned for tefillin, it's also to write divrei chayil, because hazmana ki hay gavna leguf hakadusha. So we can be medayik in the lashon of the Ramah. This type of hazmana, which is maisa gamor, where you're tanning it, and it's leguf hakadusha, then we say milsahi. So now the Mishna Berura has a kasha. Really? Hazmana milsahi? So then why can't you make, then, why do we say in Sif Aleph that if you just were mazmin shel roish, you could be moired it to shel yad? But it was hazmana b'maisa leguf hakadusha. After b'sefalav kamlan demoto shanis shel roish shel ridim kedusha mitam hazmana la milsahi. After sham hu guf hakadusha, there it's also guf hakadusha. Shani hasam dal kapanim oisem kedusha ktsas aval hacha. But here, you see, at least over there, you're retaining it for something of kedusha. Aval hacha. But here, halay roitz alasis behem devar chayil. You want to use it for a secular need. Then hazmanu beguf hakadusha helps. So it really, you need three ingredients. Number one, you need hazmana mamish b'maisa. Number two, it has to be leguf hakadusha. And number three, the use is a davar chayil. Then you can't, then hazmana milsa. But if it's for some degree of kedusha, then it's not a problem. But I'm a Magen Avram shehebi deyas hachok mazeh usfirul da'af beguf hakedusha hazmana enoklam. The Magen Avram brings opinions that argues on the Ramah that even if you are ma'abed klaf to write on it parshios, you are allowed to use it for you are allowed to write divrei chayil, because you could write your menu of what you plan on eating after the fast. Why? Because hazmana lav milsa even beguf hakadusha. V'afal piken lenyan ma'isa yesh lahachmer k'zvar rishayna. Nevertheless, lamaisa you should be machmer like the first svarach Chumash kasamnu ber halacha. V'al kol panim mahani t'nai bazeh. At the very least, a t'nai works. Miu, however, im hischa lichtov al klaf stam aishar kisei hakodesh afil al niyar. Let's say you began to write on klaf, Sefer Torah Mezuzos, or other Kisei Kodesh, or even if you start to write it on paper. So you were mazmin it, and you did more than a maisa, you used it for kedusha. Asa lichtav achagach divrei chol kuleyama. Sheza asa maisa shel guf hakedusha. V'afil t'nai loy mahani bazeh. Then for this, after you did that, you can't use it for divrei chol, and then even a t'nai will not help.
Any notebook, like of course they have Adolzman and the Boch can go to Yeshiva and they write the first line in their notebook. Now the whole notebook has Kedusha now, can't do any doodling in their notebook.
So the Mishna Berura is talking about, first he's talking about, you wrote Stam, then he says Shar Kisei HaKodesh, and then he says Afilu Al Haniyar. So is that if you wrote Kisvei HaKodesh on there? In other words, is that only if you're writing psukim from Tanakh, then it sanctifies the paper? Or even if you're writing over the Rebbe's Chakira? So in the Dirshu, he brings a lot of material on this. He says, what about Stam, printed Svarim? Do printed Svarim have Kedusha? So we said earlier in Siman Mem, Sivkat and Daled, that printing is Kesiva and it has Kedusha. And the Sharat Tzion likewise says by Hilchos Shabbos, Siman Shin Lamed Daled, that you're allowed to save on Shabbos from a fire even printed Svarim. However, B'shas Hadchak, if you don't have what to cover it with, the Mishna Berura brings earlier from the Chavos Yoyer that Tashmish Hamita, you could be lenient in a room that has Svarim Mudfasim. So it seems like there is a Tzad Lahakel. If you take a look, Rabbi say in Siman Mem, Sivkatan Daled, the Mishna Berura was lenient. He brought Kol Hameko B'Kedusha Svarim HaNefasim Asa Litein Asadin, the Defus Have Kamay Ksiva, Ach B'Tshuvas Chavas Yorsim Kov Pedal Noita Lahakal B'Zeh B'Shas Hadchak Kishe'en Lai B'Ma'al Chasos. By the way, the Dirshu points out that if you look up the Chavos Yar, he's only lenient if the publisher was a guy, not if the publisher was a Yid. What about Svarim that you didn't learn yet? Like most people, they have a big Svarim shrank, and you go to Svarim, you take out a Sefer, and you hear a big crack, even though it was published in 1953, which means that his great-grandfather, who his grandfather inherited from, that he gave to his father, gave to him, 4 generations, no one has ever cracked open that Chumash. Forget the Gemara, that we know. But even the Chumash, he has thousands of Svarim. They're mamish brand new and pristine condition. So do they have Kedusha? If you look in the letters of the Chafetz Chaim, that are Shas that nobody learned yet, you're allowed to tear out pages to photocopy them, because publishing is only Hazmana, and Hazmana Lav Milsa here. You hear that? Svarim that nobody learned, doesn't even have Kedusha. That's what the Chafetz Chaim writes in a letter in the Michtei Chafetz Chaim Michtav Pei Gimel. Rav Nissen Karelitz explains that the Chafetz Chaim only allows it to take the page out of the Sefer but not be Zayin. The Avnei Nezer writes in a tshuva, only Svarim of Torah Sheba'al Peh do not have Kedusha if you didn't learn in them. But Svarim of Torah Shebachsav, they have Kedusha even before you learn them. What about Chidushay Torah? Mishna Berura says, Siman Shin Lamed Dal Sivkon Gimel, you could be Meiko on their Kedusha, because it's like you made a T'nai, and also it's just Hazman Alav Milsa. What about if you're binding Svarim and you make Svarim dust, Sefer dust? Do Svarim dust have Kedusha? Rabbi Yashiv says, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, that if you didn't learn in the Svarim yet, they don't have Kedusha. You could sweep it up and throw it in the garbage. I have a Shulchan Aruch. It's a great Shulchan Aruch. I have this behind me. Whether I used it or not, that's a different story. But it ages very well. So when you open it up, it looks like someone's been poring over it, even though, I'm embarrassed to say how many times I've cracked it open. But it looks like it's from the 17th century. So the question is whether the crumbs of the Svarim, they fall everywhere. Are you allowed to, sweep them off the desk and put them in the garbage or not? So first of all, again, if the Sefer wasn't used, there's a heter. Also, the dust is coming not from the letters, but from the page. What about, you got a shipment of Svarim, you have nowhere to put them. Could you put them on the floor? So Rabbi Yashiv says, even though they don't have Kedusha, you shouldn't put them on the floor because it's a bizayon. But you don't have to put them a tefach off the ground. What about a guy who took notes and he just wrote Mar Makaimos, ayin here, ayin there, ayin, does that have Kedusha? No, ein b'hem Kedusha. So Rabbi Yig, you want to know if you write Chidushay Torah on a piece of paper, does the paper have Kedusha? Maybe. Sounds like it. Does the whole notebook have Kedusha? I don't know. Okay. Let's continue here. Sivkatan Chav Daled. Weiter in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, you know what? We're going to call this day... No, let's go weiter. Tsarbe. It says the Mechaber, Azmene v'loy tsarbe. If you designated a shmata and you didn't wrap the tefillin, oy tsarba, you wrapped, v'loy azmene, you didn't designate, shari l'meitzer bezuzeh, then you could use it for money. So you need a combination of hazmana and use. Use alone without hazmana will not give it kedusha. Says Mishna Berura, tsarbe. if you wrap Perush Lefi Shat, Sarbe means that you used it for tefillin just temporarily. V'gam b'stama, and you did it without qualifying. Afilum asakein pam harbe, even if you did it many times, every time you did it, it was just as a temporary measure. In other words, you had a shmata, you wrapped your tefillin in it. The next day, you didn't buy a bag yet, you wrapped it again. But you never intended to use it permanently. Because if you did it on a permanent basis, or even if you did it once, you did it that it should be a permanent arrangement. That is, you had in mind to wrap always, even if you didn't designate gam kein aser, it's aser. In other words, if you had, let's say, you had a Ziploc bag, and you didn't get your tefillin bag yet, you ordered your tefillin bag, a special fur tefillin bag. You ordered it from, a hunter in Russia. He's going to hunt down the nicest bear to make you a nice fuzzy wuzzy tefillin bag, and you're waiting. In the meantime, you're using a Ziploc bag. So if you say, I'm waiting for my bag to come. In the meantime, I'll use this Ziploc bag. You didn't have in mind it should be a permanent arrangement. You didn't designate it. You just used it. And then the next day, you use it again. The next day, you use it again. When your fuzzy wuzzy bag comes, you could use your this plastic bag for whatever you need. But if you use the plastic bag as a permanent arrangement, then it is considered azmaneh. It's considered afilu lo yazmaneh kargam kenas the havik azmaneh v'tzarbe. It's like you designate and wrapped with it. The imperish amanas lefanoisai. If you explicitly made a tanai that you're going to take the tefillin out one day, afilu tzarbe kampam, even if you wrapped many times, v'gam azan, you designated meikara mutter, because you stipulated kol shalei asa kiss l'shem tefillin, so long as you did not make the bag for the tefillin. V'chana b'siv katan yodaled. So that implies that if like this, that if you made a tanai, even if you wrapped many times, and you designated from the beginning, so in other words, you designated from the beginning, and even if you wrapped many times, you are allowed to make a tanai and say, look, I don't want it to attain kedusha. However, if the bag was made for tefillin, then you cannot make this stipulation. Okay, weiter. V'loy azmaneh. You never designated mei oilam l'shem tefillin shari. Yesh oimrim. Some say dahainu dahasudar loy niskadesh al yidei shetzarbe pamachas b'li hazmana. So the Mechaber says, if you designate, you don't wrap, or you wrap and you don't designate, it's permitted to wrap money. Says the Mishna Berura. Some say dahainu dahasudar loy niskadesh al yidei shetzarbe pamachas b'li hazmana. The sudar is not sanctified if you used it for tefillin one time without designation. Avol kol zman shat tefillin sham, so long as the tefillin is there, ein midarach hakavod laniach yachid sham gam mois. It's not proper to keep money there. Ela yikshereim bekesher b'fnei atzmai, but rather it should be in a bag by itself. What if you made a tanai from the beginning? Could you then put the money in? Because in this case you didn't make a tanai. Or maybe is the point that it's not nice that the money is jingling around with the tefillin? What if somebody made a tanai? Okay, so this we're going to call day one. Day two will be pretty short, but bear with us just a bit longer.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.